Our News Central now at this hour begins with the update on the U.S. elections. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump have battled across swing states this weekend, urging voters to decide in one of the most intense U.S. elections in modern history. Harris has encouraged Americans to turn the page on Trump's divisive politics, while Trump continues his push for a political comeback. With less than 24 hours until Election Day, close to 100 million early ballots have been cast, with more expected before polls close. Both candidates held rallies in North Carolina, while Harris addressed supporters in Georgia, and Trump made an additional stop in Virginia. Harris continued her campaign in Michigan, while Trump plans rallies in Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. Now, live to discuss more on this, we are joined by Jim Clancy, American broadcast journalist. He joins us from Atlanta, Georgia, USA. Welcome, sir. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Great to be with you, Messina. You know, we're talking about the election today. A lot of people out voting early, as you say, and in this, Georgia, which was traditionally a red state, that vote's very much up in the air. So interesting times.
Yes, indeed. Interesting. Now, we haven't heard much about Africa in the campaigns by Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. How much consideration do you think will be given to Africa in terms of foreign policy by either Trump or Harris?
Well, not much. Certainly in the election campaign, it is not an issue. But I think it's a matter, the election itself is a matter for Africans to take an interest in, and that is this debate. You know, the founding fathers of the United States didn't really know what kind of a government they were going to end up with. They had been, of course, living under a monarchy. They didn't want that. But they went to study Greece and Rome, ancient cultures and civilizations, to see what is the best form of government. Democracy, it was decided strict democracy in the Greek sense, only really existed and worked in small states. And the United States, even at that time, was a sprawling nation set to get nothing but bigger. And so they ended up with, and Ben Franklin said it famously after the Declaration of Independence, people asked, what kind of a government are we going to have? And he says, you have a republic if you can keep it. And that has been the focus of this debate and of interest, I think, to African states as well and African people as well, because the real question is, do we continue this great, and it was called this, an experiment in democracy, an experiment in letting the people somehow control their own politics, their own destiny. And it hasn't worked always. It's been a messy process for sure, but it's just thought to be better than anything else that people have been able to come up with. Now, this year, that's pretty much what people are deciding in this election. If they go with Mr. Trump, they may end up with something much more authoritarian than has been the case in the past. And this great experiment is going to be sidelined. Billions of dollars have been spent. People have been divided, like some say, never before in the history of this country. And they're going to have to decide whether they want to go in the direction that Mr. Trump wants to take things or in the direction that Kamala Harris does. Kamala Harris is more likely to continue some of the programs that benefit Africa. Donald Trump, because of the right-wing religious backing that he has, just might jeopardize things like healthcare funding for Africa that the United States participates in broadly along with other international partners. This could become an issue when abortion, if there's abortion care that's given, the U.S. under some rules would completely cut off all kinds of funding for health care in donations to African states. So that's a big issue that's out there. In general, it's thought that Kamala Harris is going to be more interested in Africa, more willing to work with African leaders than Mr. Trump, who has a record in the past of denigrating African states.
Now, there's plenty of rhetoric from Trump from before regarding the immigration, and this should concern Africans. But however, we currently see a number of African countries forming alliances with countries like China and Russia. So I'm wondering what the outcome might be for either party, if it will change this situation that we see now.
They have to wake up first. And this applies to both parties, not just to one. I think when you look at, as you noted, Other countries are basically moving into Africa, developing interests there, some of it quite controversial in terms of the funding that China provides for these infrastructure projects, but then sets up countries with a lot of debt. Uh, these are the issues that America has to consider. Now, in the case of Ghana, for instance, when the U.S. offered to send military aid, they declined. Why? Well, because there's a record here that when the U.S. puts in its military, starts training troops and selling U.S. weaponry abroad, it can be a magnet for jihadist groups to come out of the woodwork and set up their own operations to counter that. So there's a consideration that American leaders have to make, and that is to change the way we engage with Africa. And don't make it just about the military. Make it about real democratic issues. First, we've got to stand up for democracy right here at home. That's what this election is really about. And the sad part of all of this is that, yes, everybody goes to the polls tomorrow and votes for whoever they want, but this election, nobody thinks is going to be over then, because there's going to be lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit. Former President Trump, has stated quite clearly that he thinks that the Democrats are already cheating in these votes. And there have been some court cases already brought because of that. But this could end up being tied up for literally months. And no Americans are looking forward to that. Believe me, people have had enough politics.
All right, Jim. So let's talk about the final hours now. We're now at the final hours for the elections here as we're counting down. There are still some undecided voters. What do you think might sway them in either direction, whether to Trump or to Harris?
Well, a lot of people that were for Trump, some of them are saying his rhetoric in recent days has basically turned them off, and so they're still undecided. They don't want to go into the voting booth and pull a lever or enter a name that they're not certain of. I don't know if those undecided voters, and we're talking a small number of people. I don't know that they're going to change their votes at the last minute or just vote the way that they always have. That's probably the more likely thing, or they don't vote at all, because they're not motivated to do that. Kamala Harris's campaign really woke up when Joe Biden was sidelined. He sidelined himself and backed her. She got some energy out of that. Now, it's hard to tell how things are going to go. But as you noted, 100 million Americans have already voted. I'm one of them. And when voting is easy, more people turn out and vote. So we're expecting some pretty heavy numbers as people come out here. What will sway the undecided voter? At this point, nobody knows. I don't think even the undecided voters know.
Jim, now let's talk about international relationships with America and other countries. And also, let's talk about policies. Now, if either party wins, how is this going to affect relationships between America and the many countries that have interests in America, perhaps looking forward to it or already are in relationships?
Well, I think it's going to be much easier for people if they were to deal with the Harris administration. It's going to be a much more traditional approach of give and take, trying to involve various countries and partners in projects, in a thoughtful plan, a progression plan. Donald Trump is dedicated to the idea of America first, and he's going to be making demands of people. He's much more of a transactional politician, if you will. Now, this is important for countries like Ukraine. What's going to happen to Ukraine aid? It's important somewhat for Africa, but perhaps not to that extent. I think it's important for Latin American countries. Donald Trump is talking about forcefully expelling 1 million people a year who came to this country illegally, who came to this country, maybe sought asylum, but never followed up with court cases, people who have been allowed to enter the country, but haven't successfully argued that they deserve asylum from the political situations in their own home countries. And this could, to some extent, affect Africans, because we see at our southern border, it's not just Latin Americans that are coming across, but people from other countries, from China, from Africa, from the different continents around the world, make their way on that southern route into the United States. present themselves, declare themselves wanting asylum, and try to establish citizenship that way. It's a long, long, difficult process, but that's going to be one of the main areas where we're going to see some change, and we're going to potentially, if Mr. Trump is elected, certainly, we're going to see some conflicts. We're worried about the conflicts. We're worried. American voters have a lot of anxiety after the events of January 6th when the Capitol was attacked by Mr. Trump's supporters. Those cases haven't all been resolved, certainly not in Mr. Trump's case. And he is running in this election with, I think, hopes to pardon himself for any crimes that he may be convicted of. So we've got a lot on our minds right now. And it's still an uncertain period because, as I said, a lot of these critical points in the election may end up in court.
Now, Jim, the media has formed or has been a very, very big tool when it comes to both parties, using it to shape perceptions for the voters. Now, when the final outcome comes, how much do you think we can attribute to the media when it comes to shaping the votes?
Perhaps a lot, perhaps more than they should. Here's the problem. And you're talking to a veteran of 24-hour news. The 24-hour news channels, as they broadcast in the United States, are different, perhaps, than what you see on your television screens. You watch, in one case, CNN International, as opposed to CNN USA. The USA product has been focused on elections, politics, and nothing but politics for the last year. And all of these TV networks have promoted political parties and political ideologies. We have MSNBC decidedly on the Democrat side. We have Fox News that is a product of the Republican National Committee. They have served to divide the American people. We don't have a democratic process that allows for this debate, compromise between the two sides. It's become an all or nothing situation that has so divided Americans. And who benefits from the $16 billion that is spent by both political parties as they push their candidates forward? It's the media companies. It's television. They get people riled up, and then they are collecting the money for the campaign advertising that is, believe me, inundating us on our TV screens. We try to watch a football game, and every 3 minutes we are pounded with political messages criticizing another candidate, their opponents, and it's just not productive. We've lost the ability, it would seem, to reason, to work together, to solve common problems. We have the issues that seem to be cultivated by the media, all of these controversies. So it's really gotten to the point where the amount of money in our politics that is going directly back to these media companies is also being fed by the media into the public to divide us. And it's not good. It needs to be addressed.
Now, Jim, you spoke of yourself as a, 40-year veteran of 24-hour news, and I'm wondering where you stand when it comes to this economics of elections, with the media organizations making all of that money that you spoke about, and seeing them have hardline, selections for candidates, one talking for, some of them talking against, very blatantly, actually, which sometimes makes us wonder here in Africa about what the ethics of broadcasting or news broadcasting is in the U.S. Where do you stand on that?
Well, they make the excuse that this is really entertainment. People just want to hear their own political views espoused. And so that's what our anchors do. But it's not news. In fact, you'd be hard pressed to find out what was going on in the world. If you watched all three major news networks, CNN, Fox, and MSNBC, if you watched them 24 hours a day for a month, you still wouldn't have a clue what's going on in the world because they're not covering news. They're covering the making of this political sausage. And it's divisive. Some countries have laws against political advertising. We may have to go that route. The one thing that we're certain of is that we have way too much money in our politics. When it takes billions of dollars to get elected to the presidency, where does that money come from? It's not small donors. It's, big donors from big corporations and big industries like pharmaceuticals, the auto industry, and others that come out and they give the large chunks of money. And of course, they want something in return. And when you have a system like that, you've got problems. It's a lesson for, I think, for Africa and countries around the globe, smaller countries, that they can learn from our experiment. They can learn from the way that we have tried to address this. We're unable to address this, but we know that it's hurting us. We know that it's dividing us. We know that it's not producing any real solutions to real problems. I mean, we take a look at what's going on in Gaza today. Gaza and the occupied territories in South Lebanon. Our chief ally, Israel, is bombing some of those places into oblivion. Gaza is just nothing short of a catastrophe right now, today. And we are not just standing by doing nothing. We are aiding and abetting. Those are our bombs that are being dropped. We know that. And yet no politician has the strength or courage to stand up and repudiate that, to criticize it, to support South Africa, for instance, in its bid to bring both Israel and Hamas to the International Criminal Court and put them on trial for the war crimes that they say are being committed, and even and up to the genocide that may be perpetrated upon the Palestinian people. But no U.S. politician will touch that with a 10-foot pole. Why? Well, because the Israeli lobby is so strong in this country. And not only that, if one party, one politician stands up and says that, they are immediately circled and attacked by the other politicians within the same party or in the opposing party. And it's a real lesson in how you lose your ability to act in a humane way. You know, the United States always talks a great line about human rights. And unfortunately, we don't walk the walk. We talk the talk just fine, but we don't walk the walk at all. Gaza is a case in point. And certainly what we saw in Rwanda was a case in point. President Clinton was interviewed just a day ago or so, and he said that was one of his biggest regrets. But he sloughed it off and put the blame on somebody else. But the fact of the matter was, we can watch a genocide taking place in front of our eyes and not be moved to take action. Now, it's not only inhumane, it's illegal under international law to countenance a genocide. So we have some serious questions to answer here in the United States, and that should be an example for others.
Well, Jim, I want to say thank you very much. It's been an honor speaking with you on the news here today. Jim Clancy is an American broadcast journalist, and he's joined us from Atlanta, Georgia, the USA, as we talk about the last hours, final hours, just before the elections for America. Thank you once again, sir.